thank you, fourth panel. So my overarching question for the three of you in your presentations is thinking about the control of presentation, right? So the control of presentation in museums, the control of presentation of the vloggers in terms of how they're presenting themselves and presenting the content, as well as what is the power of the audience in these environments. So maybe if each of you could talk about how you perceive control of presentation in your context of your research, as well as what sort of power you see audiences having in responding to that presentation.
Me?
I was just offering the part. Sure, actually, I can talk about that and actually bring up one of the other blurred boundaries that I've interpreted, the social and commercial one. A lot of beauty bloggers would tell you that unfortunately they don't have a lot of control over their final message. They will for months present or post videos. They'll have comments in the comment section and without any drama. But what happens a lot, particularly when it comes to monetization of beauty blogs, that's where almost all of the drama stems. Because originally there was no way to monetize YouTube blogs, and that's when a lot of them started beauty blogging, but now there is, and it's come slowly, and because sometimes subscribers realize when something's being monetized, sometimes they don't, sometimes beauty bloggers disclose it, sometimes they don't. Whenever there is some sort of partnering with a makeup brand, which a lot of subscribers are very happy for their beauty blogger about because it means they've reached like a pinnacle of success, but they're often knocked down from it because that's when the other audience interpretations come in, whether saying that, accusing the beauty blogger of not disclosing their financial agreement or any number of things. So I think that has been a lesson because of the monetization that has come incrementally into the YouTube space, that they would say they just don't have they don't have any control over it in the end.
It's an interesting question for me to think about the presentation piece and maybe even more so the power of audience. I went back and forth, especially with my research question, about whether or not to keep in the sort of purview the questions about teaching practice. Because as I think my presentation showed, I'm really interested in the kind of bigger picture, the meta, sort of how these educators are finding their way, and kind of how their current situation as new art museum educators is situated in their full life experience. But one of the things that I don't explicitly state in the research questions that I'm interested in is how they know to do what they do. Like, where are they getting not just the support, but the knowledge base. And I think that that's going to come up with the questions around, like, what was your path to getting here? Because I suspect that their education and that kind of thing will come into it. For me, the whole reason that I went into art museum education, as I said, was I started doing it for one reason, because I was an artist and looking to be around art, and then I fell in love with the sort of magical things that can happen with a group of people and with individuals in the space. And so I suspect that other people might have a similar story, and that they might have found themselves there for any number of reasons, but the magic that happens when you're with a group of people and you're with an art object. So for me, the power of audience comes, I suspect it will come out of the interviews when they talk about why they're doing the work, I guess, is probably my answer to that question.
So whenever I go into different Korean art galleries in different art museums in America, I always think that there is a certain recipe that they kind of share, that the curators and working at the art museums want to convey a certain message about the Korean culture to the audience. And that's like, whenever I go into the museum, it's like almost the same, the physical setting of it, the object, the selection of objects. I mean, it's always the white wall. It has a very calm kind of very calm atmosphere, and it's wooden floors, and there's always this didactic information that always has a piece of the map of Korea, and the information is also very identical. So, so there is this certain representational kind of representation of Korean culture that they always want to convey to the audience. What I want to examine in my dissertation is, in my research, is that I'm not going for anti-representation. I don't want to subvert all the information that they're trying to convey, but instead, I'm thinking of using those physical contents, those informations, the physical settings, the concepts, ideas that are shared in the Korean galleries as a springboard towards a new imaginative, like a more productive kind of imaginations for the audience to and they engage with the objects of Korean objects. I thought that would be a way to not think of those objects as a form of taxidermy, like those lifeless kind of objects in the museum and preserved in the glass case, but rather as a way to contemporize the objects. When we're looking at contemporary artworks, we think of them as like different. We interpret them differently rather than when we're looking at traditional objects. There is a way of something that's set, the message is set when we're looking at traditional objects, whereas when we're looking at contemporary artworks, we kind of bring our own context. We think about the surrounding, the situations, the present context that I'm engaging when I'm bringing when I'm engaging with the objects. But what I want to do is to do that, to bring that kind of conception of interpretation when we're looking at traditional objects as well. So. And I really think that that's not being anti-representation of the objects, but being like thinking about a way to think about the objects in a more than representational way. So, so that's actually what I'm trying to do.
So, all three of you are, I think, using theory to challenge sort of particular fixed narratives, right? So you're looking at gender and identity in society through this glam, right? So there are things that you're challenging there with using Judith Butler. And you, I think, are using phenomenology to sort of challenge the professional positionality of new art museum educators by using some of their own experiences to essentially helping them speak for themselves in a way that they maybe aren't now, and investigating a situation that has been neglected, as I think we all know. A lot of museum education has been neglected, so I'm super happy to hear that 2 of the 3 are situated in museums. Not that I don't like, you two. And I think you're, Jung, thinking a lot about challenging these sort of encounters with objects and sort of what are the narrative of sort of the ways in which people encounter particular Korean objects, traditional Korean objects. And I think what I'm so fascinated with is that there seems to be sort of a dialogic possibility with the way that the 2 of you, there are people sort of working together to create these new narratives, right? So there's the audience and the vlogger, and then there's the museum educator and you and the public. There's this sort of dialogue going on, and I'm thinking about an encounter or an encounter with an object, like how that can be dialogic when in fact the object is not alive. And that really the thing that makes it alive is our experiences of it or our thoughts of it. So, and you did point to sort of this notion that people create particular situations in museums. Like there's somebody who is behind putting that object there, lighting it in a particular way. And you're right, like every Korean object that we saw in your presentation is pretty much like every piece of ceramic at the Palmer and probably most places. So you're seeing a similarity. But I guess I'm trying to reckon in my own mind what it means to challenge a particular narrative with an encounter with an object that doesn't, to me, offer a lot of dialogic possibilities on its own. Does that make sense?
Mhm. So when I was thinking about how to think about a museum as a novel, so that's when I came up with the term novelized museum. So when we're reading a novel, so when we turn on the pages, we open the book, turn on the pages, and read the text. There is this hero doing something, the activity, and there's always this time and space, the setting that kind of kind of provides the context of the hero's activity. And whenever we read a novel, it's not that we're just reading it by text. It's not that the vocabularies, the sentences and everything, it's not just isolated, it's not just words written on paper, but as we read it, we kind of, we bring our imagination. So it just suddenly kind of becomes something that's really, something that's living, something that's alive. It's where the tropes, the path, the hero's activity, everything just kind of comes together to form this specific setting which is not identical for each reader. Each readers always imagine things differently, right? So I wanted to bring that kind of perception into the museum and think about the objects, the physical settings, not just the positive space like the objects, just that, but the negative spaces like the hallways, the gallery spaces, the walls, and everything that kind of constructs our perception of the objects. Those are not just physical objects, but they're conceptual objects as well. That kind of brings the objects to life and makes our engagement with the object dialogical. So it can't be always the same, because every time we enter a museum and encounter the objects, our mood will be different. And depending on the person we're with, if I'm alone there or if I bring someone, there's all this different context that we engage with the object. And
Or even what time of day it is, whether it's dark and sort of romantic. Yeah, I mean, all of this. But I think I'm sort of pressing this a little bit because I think that there seems to me to be one sort of part of this that's maybe a bit unfulfilled for me, which is that there are people, both education-wise and sort of, I mean, it's like a theater performance. There are people putting this together for you, and I absolutely know that you recognize that, but I guess I'm not really hearing the perspectives at all of the people who are putting this together for you. And can we have a complete understanding of this narrative without thinking just a tiny bit about the motivations of the people who are actually putting it out there for you to interpret or for you to have that narrative with? Does that make sense?
Right. So it's not that I'm privileging the audience's perception, just the object itself, or the curator's intention, or the intention of the museum itself, but it's like forming this dialogical interrelationship between all those that doesn't kind of impose a hierarchy, but they're all in relation to each other. So yeah. And what I'm trying to do is to explore that in-between space that kind of emerges this chronotropic energy in the museum and makes the perception of the object dialogical.
I think this notion of using theory to investigate all of these things just enables alternative futures, and that's kind of why we're all here. So I really enjoyed all three of your presentations.
It would be a good shift right now to audience. Mary Ann?
Thank you. Again, I want to bounce off Dana's question. And I also want to be sure to thank Dana and Ryan. I think you guys have done a fantastic job of tag team responding today. As Dana was asking her question and pressing Yoon Jung, I was thinking about an exhibition that I saw at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston a couple weeks ago of two Japanese printmakers, Kuniyoshi and Kunisada. And the exhibition designers asked you when you walked in, are you Team Kuniyoshi or Team Kunisada? And they set it up in parallel ways, and partway through the exhibition, I realized that one artist was framed with black and one with brown. So it strikes me that they were glamming up the prints by the way they framed them. And there was a digital quiz at the end so that you could, support your team. And that the educators probably were quite experienced, not the very beginning ones, but I do wonder if the curators and the educators were collaborating, because it was one of the most educational, deliberately, thoughtfully, really trying to engage the viewer. And I think, Yoon Jung, I've seen Korean museums, and my experience of the Liam Museum was that you were told where to go. And the audio said, you will appreciate. And I kind of resisted that a little bit. And it was the sort of purity of the white cube that was talked about in relation to modernism. And I wonder if that may make it harder to create the novel. Whereas I was engaged, and there was a storyline going through all of the wall text with the MFA exhibition. So one thing to keep in mind might be that there are different kinds of novels. There are murder mysteries that I like, there are thick, fat Victorian novels, and then there's, A Rose is a Rose is a Rose. Who's the author's name? This is a quiz. Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein novels. So what kind of novel?
So
You like
what-
murder mysteries? I didn't know that
You
about
better believe it.
So exactly, that is actually the quest that I'm embarking right now, to find a novel that kind of corresponds to my experience at the museum and kind of find the connecting thread between that. So that would be a really, so that's actually what I'm trying to do right now, to find the perfect novel.
I have not watched this film all the way through, but I feel like it speaks to what you're talking about. There's a film called The Red Violin with Samuel Jackson from almost 20 years ago now, that basically is about the narrative of this violin over time.
The cultural biography of it?
Yeah.
And it was a novel first.
Was it? Okay, there you go.
Excellent.
There you go.
Which also might think of Foucault's pendulum, might be.
What about Barthes? Like writerly versus readerly texts, would that go?
Yeah, pleasure of the text is
Yeah.
another part.
All right.
I think it is 5:30, and I just really want to thank, this is the respondents here all day long, and yesterday too, that you have just done a tremendous job, and thank you for taking the challenge that I gave you early, but fabulous. It's a lot of work, and so appreciate Ryan Patton and Dana Carlisle Kletka for coming here.